Hello and Happy New Year. Well, the debate in Parliament is only days away. The debate triggered by the petition which you may well have signed. Why is this important? It's important because we have a government who are, it would seem, rudderless, directionless in some ways, not having been ready for power, but convinced of their own moral superiority. Keir Starmer's ratings have plummeted so low, he's down and through the other side of the earth and now following the trajectory of Voyager 1. Let's look at something that Keir said relatively recently.
A calm rebuilding. A rejection in this complicated and volatile world of those who can only offer the easy answer, the snake oil charm of populism. Mr. Speaker, as the last 14 years has shown, that road is a dead end for this country.
So he seems to have a real issue with populism. And yet, what is populism? From this article, what actually is populism and why does it have a bad reputation? Even among academics, populism has been difficult to define. This is partly because it is manifested in different ways during different times. While currently its most well-known cases are right-wing parties, leaders and movements, it can also be left-wing. Oh, can it? There's an academic debate on how to categorise the concept. Is it an ideology? I think in part it is. A style? Yes. A discourse? Yes. Or a strategy? Absolutely. I think it could be all of those things. But across these debates, researchers tend to agree populism has two core principles. Number one, it must claim to speak on behalf of ordinary people. Number two, these ordinary people must stand in opposition to an elite establishment which stops them from fulfilling their political preferences. I think what that means is their desires, what they would like to see the person, the group, the government in charge do in a way that aligns with their desires, hopes, wishes, aspirations, etc. These two core principles are combined in different ways with different populist parties, leaders and movements. For example, left-wing populists' conceptions of the people and the elite generally coalesce around socio-economic grievances, whereas right-wing populists' conceptions of those groups generally tend to focus on socio-cultural issues such as immigration. Although I would say that in particular, immigration, I don't think now, at this point in time in this country, could really be defined as something that people are concerned about because they're on the left or the right. I think generally there is a concern now that we understand more and more about what is going on and also the lack of a rationale for a lot of it. What I want to do now is I want to point out that one of the reasons I believe that Keir Starmer has an issue with populism is because one interpretation of it, let's call it bad populism, is that people stir up the crowd. They say, hey, you can get all these things if I'm in charge. And good populism is basically tapping into what people want, their fears, their hopes, their aspirations, and saying, hey, I agree with you, genuinely, I will fight for that, and if I'm in charge, I'll make sure that it happens. Let's then, with that in mind, consider some of the things that Labour promised. I'm sure you'll be aware of some things on the list. First of all, there were the waspy women, and how many videos did you see, pieces of writing did you read that were well, would have given the impression to, I think, almost anyone that Labour were going to support these women. I've played clips of that stuff before. I'm not going to do it now because that's just one of many. And this list is in no particular order and is absolutely not exhaustive. And of course, we also have the tax farm raid. Here's Keir talking not too long ago.
Today seems to bring a new existential risk to British farming. Losing a farm is not like losing any other business. It can't come back. That's why the lack of urgency from the government, the lack of attention to detail, the lack of long-term planning, it's not on. You deserve better than that.
Does he not realise that the internet allows you to look at things in times gone by and compare them to what is happening present day? Perhaps not. However, I am pleased to report, despite the tax raid on the farmers, they are fully supportive of Keir.
Organisers of the protest said the Prime Minister had been disrespectful.
It's so frustrating that he's run out the back door like a flipping rat.
And note to this also, Steve Reid, DEFRA Secretary, told the Country Land and Business Association's Rural Business Conference the following. Victoria, who's the CLA president, you asked me last year if Labour would raise APR, inheritance tax. I said no. That was our position at that time. What? I mean, this is like a sort of Monty Python sketch. What are we doing here? What are these people doing? This is nonsense. So many things, of course, are being blamed on the so-called black hole. And yet, as I talked about recently, Diane Abbott suggested that that wasn't that much of a surprise. And I think she's, in essence, right. If any of us think for a second that these members of Parliament don't talk to one another, don't have insight, don't have their little back channel ways of communicating, then I think we're being naive. Take, for example, a lot of the debate that happens that you see televised in Parliament. What do you think these bits of paper are that they come up with and flick open when they're answering questions? Of course, they have an idea, not all the time, but a lot of the time, about the subject that's going to be discussed. And that in many ways is a good thing, don't get me wrong, because we need them to give coherent and pithy answers, the detail of which is as often as not supplied by the civil servants. But make no mistake, quite a lot of this stuff is, at least in terms of what we see televised, performative in nature. What I'm getting at here is you can't really survive, I would imagine, in politics without being quite well networked, without knowing what's going on. And I suggest that the black hole wasn't that much of a surprise to Labour. What we're seeing is them saying, so this justifies us doing these things. Were they going to be doing these things anyway? I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. They didn't tell us, however, just sat in the shadows. Literally, said nothing, pretty much nothing, about the plans, and then unleashed them. And maybe it was a knee-jerk reaction. Maybe they were shocked with the black hole. But these days, unfortunately, I have my suspicion. And why is that? Because trust has been lowered. It has been diminished. It has been, to a great degree, lost. And I'm sure that I'm not alone. And that trust is important to have between the population and the governing body. What else have we got in terms of little promises? Well, not raising taxes on working people. Another Labour pre-election claim that has been heavily attacked was not to raise taxes on working people. And yet, as it says there, critics argue small business owners, often hard-working individuals and small salaries who have no employment benefits regular jobs offer, are working people. And so when we have this this rise on employers' national insurance contributions to 15% from 9,100 to 5,000, it has a material effect. It will make a difference. And then we also have increased borrowing. Labour promised not to increase borrowing before the election. But Chancellor Reeves, that's Rachel from Accounts, has fiddled the UK's finance rules to do just that. The move is expected to allow the Chancellor to raise £50 billion, something Labour want to fund the NHS, schools and pay rises for unions like train drivers. Ms Reeves denied that she was effectively fiddling the rules to get around her manifesto pledge not to increase income tax, VAT or national insurance. Her massive shake-up of the UK finances was not endorsed by the OBR. However, the independent financial watchdog predicted growth flattening after an initial sugar rush cash injection, a blow when Labour inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7. Did they? Oh, that's interesting. They don't talk about that much. Let's then, as I said, this list is not exhaustive. This is for demonstration purposes only, just to remind us what's been going on. Let's look at this debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer about pensioners, because I haven't mentioned them so far recently.
I don't apologise for asking on their behalf again whether he will finally rule out cutting their state pension to fulfil the enormous black hole in his spending plans.
Mr. Speaker, of course we can rule that out, and the honourable gentleman should stop scaremongering, because it's thanks to the triple lock that we've increased pensions by £3,700 since 2010, and they will rise in each and every year of the next Parliament. But it's Labour that always hits pensioners hard. It's his mentors, Blair and Brown, that broke their promises, raised pension taxes by £118 billion and delivered an insulting 75p rise in the state pension. As one former Labour advisor just said, Brown destroyed our pension system. They did it before, they'll do it again. Labour always betray our pensioners.
Well, who would have thought? I kind of miss Rishi. He certainly was on the money there. And as an aside, I always, when I considered Rishi's leadership, thought about him as someone who was just loving the prestige of it, almost couldn't quite believe his luck. He was absolutely delighted, but at least it was an honest emotion. Now, is Rishi really in touch with most working class people? No, of course he's not. But at least there was a purity to the emotion that I believe he displayed, relishing the prestige. But I would differentiate that from Keir Starmer, who appears to be, well, at least he was initially, relishing the power, the levers of power. Now, well, I think what we're seeing is Keir kind of hoist by his own petard, sort of, in the sense that Keir Starmer, I think, thinks that populism means you rabble-rouse, you do the demagoguery type thing with no intention of actually delivering what you said you were going to deliver. Whereas good populism, in my opinion, is something that shouldn't necessarily be looked at in a disparaging way, because it can be beneficial to everyone involved. But ironically, irony of ironies, what it looks like Keir has done, either deliberately or by accident, has been a bad populist, veering towards demagoguery. The excuse being, of course, the black hole. And it's to do with fixing the foundations. But I would say that a lot of what we have seen from this party so far has actually been cruel. There has been a lack of empathy. So what we need on the 6th is not some kind of performative Popinjay pantomime where people look like they're giving each other a hard time for our benefits. So we walk away thinking, wow, they really told them what they thought. We actually need action. We need change from the Labour Party. We may need a change of leader, and we may actually need a change of party. Because 4.5 years approximately more of this stuff from Labour, I dread to think genuinely what sort of state we will be in.
Oh, come, Sergeant.
You should be ashamed. Calling yourself a community that cares.
Oh, but we do care, Nicholas.
It's all about the greater good.
The greater good.
How can this be for the greater good?
The greater good.
How can this be for the greater good?
The greater good.
Shut it!